It would be my guess that most beginners to guitar effects would probably bypass compression altogether, purely because they don't understand what it is, or it seems like you need a degree in rocket science just to figure out what all the parameters do. But once you fully understand what the parameters do, I can tell you that it makes such a huge difference to not only the dynamics of your playing, but also, in coming across sounding much more like a pro player. So let's have a look at the parameters of compression, and let's see if we can kind of unveil some of the mystery. Okay, so what we have here is the compressor module found in Cubase. Think of compression as an automatic volume control designed to reduce the dynamic range of an audio signal by applying gain reduction when the input exceeds a certain level. So in other words, imagine you've plugged your guitar into the mixing desk. You've got the sound engineer who is basically riding the volume fader of your guitar so that when the VU meters on the desk go up to a certain level, indicating that you're playing too loud, he brings the volume down. When you're playing very soft, he brings the level up. So compression basically works in that way, in that you set a threshold and a ratio. Basically, as you're playing, the signal remains intact until you reach the threshold that you've set. Once it does reach your predetermined threshold, it is then reduced by the amount as set by your ratio. The ratio control is very important because this determines the severity of the gain reduction to be applied once the signal reaches the threshold. So just going back to the analogy of our sound engineer riding the volume fader, basically you tell him how much to reduce the volume once the level has exceeded the threshold. So for an example, the higher the ratio, the more gain reduction is applied and the stronger the compression effect. If the ratio is above 10, it is usually referred to as limiting. That is why most compressors are often termed compressor limiters. So for example, ratio is defined as the number of dB by which the input level needs to increase to cause a corresponding 1 dB rise in output level. If, for example, a compression ratio of 2:1 is set, an input signal exceeding the threshold by 2 dB will cause only a 1 dB increase in output level. So because the level is being reduced corresponding to the set ratio, most compressors have built-in level controls or make-up gain controls that restore the overall level that was lost due to the compression. This, of course, can increase the dynamics of soft signals. Okay, so let's check out the attack and release parameters. These parameters affect how fast or slow the compression is applied to the signal. Attack affects the start of the signal. So for an example, when you strike a string, you hear the initial attack with your plectrum. But if your compression is set with an attack value of 0, the compressor will kick in straight away and you'll lose the punch of that initial strike. By setting a slower attack, so for an example, an attack of 15 to 20 milliseconds should be enough for the initial attack of the string pick to come through. So then after the initial attack, the compressor kicks in and then helps to fatten or bring up the level of the rest of the note. The release, however, has the opposite effect. It affects the end of the signal, so basically governs how long it takes for the compressor to turn off. For most guitar picking, you may have this set to 0, so that it's ready to kick in again the moment you strike another note. Okay, so let's translate these parameters into some practical examples. We just saw all the parameters contained within a typical studio-style compressor. However, most pedal compressors don't have anywhere near as many parameters on them. Here I have the MXR Dynacomp, and as you can see, it has basically an output and a sensitivity. So, of course, the output governs how loud the output signal is of the compressor. So at its minimum value, I'm not getting any signal. And turning it up nearly full gives me unity, which is basically the same level when I turn the pedal off. So off, because I haven't set the sensitivity yet, is a fairly weak signal. Now, the sensitivity adjusts basically the ratio. So higher settings yield more ratio, so more compression. So as I turn it up, So you can hear at its highest value, I'm getting almost like a clicky sound. So it should be said that compression can generally be placed either before or after the preamp. Now, when it's placed before the preamp, it has a much more subtle tone. When it's placed after the preamp, it has a much more dynamic, clicky type sound, more of a percussive sound, if you will. So at the moment you can hear the amount of buzz probably coming through the signal, and that's because I've got the sensitivity up full. Basically the compressor is boosting the low levels, and in this case it's increasing the noise floor. So the more compression you've got, the more it's going to bring low levels up, and in that case it means noise, little artifacts it's going to bring up to make them louder. So when you're using compressor, there's a fine line between over compressing and just giving you the subtle punch that you need. So because I've got this compressor placed after my preamp, I'm getting a very percussive tone. And I should also point out that overdrive sounds and distortion generally don't need compression. The way that distortion works inherently adds its own compression. So when you add compression to an already compressed sound, it just gets too overdone, and it really doesn't sound very good. So I generally just use it on clean sounds. If I'm using dirty sounds for soloing, then you might use a bit of compression to basically help with sustain. So for instance, holding a note, the compressor kicks in once the level starts to drop and brings the level of my note up. I'll turn it up full. So you can hear the note coming up, but you can also hear the noise floor coming up with it. So, it's again a fine line. It's a bit of a balancing act between enough compression without overdoing it and causing too much noise in the signal. So I'll just turn the sensitivity down to about halfway and go back to my clean signal. Turn it off. So it's a much weaker signal. So that's a pretty good level for clean compression. Here we have two pedals that basically have the same bank of controls. The Boss compressor sustainer has a sustain, attack, tone and level, whereas the Digitech main squeeze has a sustain, EQ instead of tone, same thing, attack and level. So let's have a look at how these parameters relate to the studio compressor that we had a look at. Firstly, I've got the CS3, the Boss compressor sustainer, turned on. So now I'll just return the parameters back to their default of 0. Now, first of all, our level controls the level of the compression. So at the moment, I have nothing. Turning the level up, I'll start to get signal. I'm just going to go to about 3 o'clock. It's about 3/4 at the moment. Because as I start to increase my attack, that's where we're going to start to hear the actual dynamics start coming into play. So the attack works as an attack and release in this case, whereas with the studio compressor we had an attack and a separate release. Basically the attack is in its minimum position with a longer release time, and as we increase the attack, the release is shortened. And then we have our sustain, which basically governs our ratio, so how much compression is applied. So as we turn up, we start to hear how the makeup gain is starting to come into play. So the more ratio and compression that we're applying, it's bringing more level up. So then we have to start backing off our actual level. Okay, so you can hear it's got quite a clicky little sound. So we can probably increase a little bit more attack and the sustain. And as I increase more attack, you'll hear more of the actual pick attack coming in. So just turn it off. So the sound is quite thin when I haven't got the compressor on, but then it fattens up slightly with the compressor on. From here on in, I've got a tone control that I can adjust the actual sound of the compression. So now it's got a real click about it. Probably got too much click for me, so I would tend to back off the sustain and maybe take the attack down to about half. So just remember that, again, we've got no EQ, we've got no other effects such as delay or reverb or chorus to help fatten the sound. So we're relying strictly on the compression to basically boost our sound here. So that's a pretty good starting point. So if we just switch over to the Digitech pedal, same kind of deal. We can use the EQ like the tone on the Boss one, and the attack, and I'll just get similar settings and have a bit of a comparison.